Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is June 2nd, 2022. Joining me for today's podcast is the dynamic duo of tech journalism. That's Stuart Walpin, who scribes for Popular Mechanics, U.S. News, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other fine publications. John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. Rob Peguero, who frequently joins us and writes for Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and USA Today, is out on assignment. Gentlemen, good afternoon. The world's in great shape. The Yankees are up 2-0. I think it's 2-0. How's your week going? Yeah, it's hard to do a podcast and watch a ball game at the same time.
Right.
It's not. Hey, Stuart. Hey, wonderful new digs, Stuart. I'm very impressed. When did you move?
Please do not be fooled by the rich surroundings. It's all green screen.
Well,
it makes me feel
John,
as if I'm living in the lap of luxury.
Well, John, I know your background is real. That is not a false background.
This is the real deal, Rothko print and large screen TV that I reviewed sitting on the floor because I haven't packed it back up again yet.
I hate it when you have problems. Well,
yeah.
Well, anyway, we got an exciting week next week with WWDC. We'll be getting into that in a few moments. Let us kind of key up a topic that I do want to address, just given the timeliness of it. And that is, given the horrific shootings last week in Uvalde, that people are still world is still kind of reeling from the horrific scale of the massacre. I mean, you can't call it anything less than that. I wrote something about this on my LinkedIn newsletter. Obviously, I'm a big fan of smart technology. I know you guys understand the benefits of smart technology as well. And, I wrote what I thought was a pretty interesting column on whether smart technology, if it's applied equally and consistently in a comprehensive manner, could this incident been mitigated? I mean, it's hard to say that technology would completely have prevented this from happening. But I do really think there are things at the technology level that could certainly have thwarted this guy, and prevented him from getting into the school. He might have eventually gotten to the school in other means, but, whether it's smart sensors on doors, smart locks, I write about there's now acoustic sound technology that's been around actually for quite some time that allows, with acoustic sensors, allows you to really pinpoint with incredible accuracy the location of a shooter. There's all kinds of technology. We'll obviously talk a little bit about the social media monitoring angle of this. But Stuart, let me start with you. Is that I know we're wringing our hands over gun control. Background checks that are much more consistent. That dialogue certainly needs to happen. But just confining the discussion to smart technology, can't we all agree on that smart technology could play a substantial role in kind of mitigating these kind of situations in the future? What's your view on that?
No, I really don't. It's a couple of things here. First, obviously, this is treating the symptom, not the disease, as I think we previously discussed. The second thing is this presupposes that there is a willingness and a financial freedom in order to implement any and all of these things. As we all know, school budgets are all local, and not all school systems are created equal. So what you're going to end up having, even if you start implementing this, they cannot be implemented on a universal scale simply because there are school districts who will either be unable to or unwilling to install these technologies. Remember, during the COVID thing, there was a huge issue over installing ventilation systems simply because a lot of school systems couldn't afford it. So this would have to be a federal program, and any federal education program always runs into political issues. So it's not a matter of the technologies, whether the technologies are effective or not. It's whether or not it can be applied universally, and whether or not local school boards, especially in poor districts, could even afford to do these sorts of things. The second thing I'd like to note is that the most smart technology, the best smart technology, is the James Bond technology from Skyfall, which is essentially making guns fingerprint, smart guns that can only be fired by the people whose fingerprints are registered on the weapon. And that has been something that has actually been discussed over the years. But of course, the gun makers don't want to do that. It would make an expensive gun for one thing, and I don't think legislators, which would be the problem with any of these smart technologies, would be willing to spend the money to implement. So I think there are myriad issues involved in trying to rely on technology to solve, which is essentially a social behavioral problem, the iconization of gun culture to the point where nobody even understands why the Second Amendment was written to begin with.
Thank you for that detail. Thank you for that detailed reply. You had that in your quiver, ready to go, and I do appreciate that. And before I reply to some of the things you just said, because I want to give John a chance to weigh in on that question, then I'll give you my rebuke. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things. I mean, the technologies that you've talked about, but are like knowing where the kids are in a room, for example, which is, and there definitely is, latest versions of radar that they were using in cars, for example, to see if there's somebody in the back seat, if a child is in the back seat. Right. And it obviates the privacy issue because it's not like a camera. You don't actually see the person, but you can detect that somebody's there. And there is technology like that, and it's not horrifically expensive to do. But again, these kids had the latest technology in the palm of their hand. They were talking to the police on the phone, on their smartphone, and it didn't do them any good. So, I think that this is a case where the technology can't supply an immediate answer. I mean, it can supply an answer in terms of instantaneous background checks. I could do that. I can link to any database, certainly within seconds, no excuse for that. Tell you, whether this person's ever threatened anybody and, all that sort of thing, that could be done. But there has to be a political will. There has to be, society has to want to do that. And until the society wants to do that, then we're just going to continue to see little kids get shot at school. I mean, there's really nothing else short of that you can really do, I think.
Well, there's no question the police response, which was horrific. That's the only way you could wrap a characterization around that. I mean, I will say that to Stuart's point, yes. I mean, most people don't know or don't realize. Well, maybe most people do understand this. If school funding is done at the local level. Now, the federal government, though, has a long-standing history that when they want to provide programs, they do a carrot and stick approach where, hey, we got $100 million. If you do these things, you can get these dollars, And so I think the dollars can be supplied. My concern is a couple of things. In some of the less well-resourced school districts, for example, this Uvalde district was in a part of Texas, which is probably very not poorly funded, but it's probably in a very fiscally challenged part of Texas. Number two is the police force was only 6 people, by the way. Not too many people realize that, but it was a very small. And if the police force is only 6 people, I can only imagine the kind of resources they have at the school district level. And to implement this kind of capability, and Stuart, I'm sure you appreciate this, you have to have really good IT expertise. The high school in Los Gatos, California, or Cupertino, 5 minutes from me, probably has lots and lots of wonderful IT resources because we're in Silicon Valley. I'm suspecting that in Uvalde, Texas, some of the kids probably have more IT expertise than the school itself. So there's that issue as well. And it has to be done consistently. You have to have these sensors on every window, on every door. There has to be the capability to monitoring all that video with real-time alerts, because you're not going to have the personnel to do that in real time. So you have that's another IT issue that's going to be worked out.
It's a resource. It's not only a monetary resource; it's a personnel resource. And then the other thing on this is we're only talking about these small. I won't say small. That's not the right word. But the instances of school shootings. Just yesterday, there was the Oklahoma shooting, which was not a school. We have hundreds of these mass shootings, and only the highly publicized ones are the school ones because they involve kids, but most mass shootings are not in school. And so we may solve some of the mass shootings and school problems by instituting some of these technologies in those districts that have the resources, both on the personnel side and the financial side and the willingness side to do it. But it barely addresses the larger issue of the daily mass shootings. I went to find a list. There are lists everywhere of mass shootings, which is defined as 4 casualties from one single incident, and there are literally almost one every day somewhere in the country. There are very, very few of them that are actually at schools. The ones at schools simply end up being the high casualty and high publicized events, but that's only it's only a fraction of the amount of casualties from mass shootings every day. So applying this smart technology to school, I think, is a percent of the solutions, which have to be far more widespread. And it all starts, obviously, with access to firearms to begin with.
No, Stuart, I agree with that. I think the biometric fingerprint capability on guns would be great. And
that's what I was think of.
With 400 million guns in the world, in the country, which is
that's the other problem.
Kind of estimate. There are more guns than people in the country. I'm not sure how many people will be willing to, hey, let me trade in my gun and buy a more expensive gun that it has a fingerprint sensor on it.
Right.
Although I
think you'd have to think about buyback programs, but you're right. The amount of guns in the country, this is like turning off the faucet after your house has been underwater for 2 years. You still have all this water to deal with. I mean, just turning off the faucet, it's not going to help.
Well, there's very limited, protections you can get. Like the biometrics won't help you because in the last 3 cases, they all bought their own guns. They went and bought a semi-automatic weapon, and within hours took it and murdered a bunch of people. That's how quickly they were able to do it. So it's not going to really make any difference. And the shot spotter technology is great too. I live in Manhattan. I understand, an urban environment and the problems in cities like Chicago, but it's after the fact. It's just trying to police an area because you just don't have a human being to put on every street corner.
Well, see, what I struggle with, and we could talk about this forever, is that in this particular case in Uvalde, apparently the kid, I won't even call him a kid because he was a nut job. Apparently he bought 325 rounds at a there has to be I was saying that, and by the way, I am not a gun person myself. There are gun people and there are not gun people. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, but guns scare the crap out of me for a whole bunch of different reasons. So I have kind of a different profile than your classic, Second Amendment type of person on that topic. But it's incredible to me that that someone might say, "Hey, kid, you're 18 years old. Why are you buying 300 rounds of ammunition?" Now, there could be a very legitimate reason. Maybe they were going to Chuck E. Cheese for his birthday party, and they went to a shooting range type of thing. But they ought to be vetted. There should be a visit by a cop or a phone call saying, "Hey, why is this happening? Why are you buying so much ammunition?" And John, to your point, the background checks is wonderful, except that it's inconsistent across most of the country. And in many of these shootings, the person hasn't committed any crimes. It's not on the radar. It's not on the proverbial, well, this guy committed a crime. Why does he have a gun in the first place? Type of
right.
thing.
But there's no reason for it to be inconsistent. You can make it consistent.
Yes,
like I can access, I can get my friendly neighborhood hacker can access every database. That's not really an issue. You can certainly do that if you wanted to, if you were willing to put that in place. And I'll just point out, look, there are lots of guns in Canada too. Lots and lots of guns. This stuff just doesn't happen there. The guns have to be locked up. There are age restrictions. There's certain kinds of guns you can't get, that would kill people really fast. So, licensing is a pretty you can't drive a car here without a license, or you're not supposed to, but so all of that, there are differences that people need to look at and consider solutions. So, but I love technology. That's my life. But when it can't do something, I got to admit it can't do something here.
Well, I'll just leave you on this because you mentioned the permit or the licensing piece. is that growing up in good old New Jersey, I was into model rockets. Remember model rockets?
No, I use those.
And
Absolutely.
Centauri. And in New Jersey, and this is in the
Estes
70s,
rockets.
Estes and Centauri. You remember they had a thing called the egg rock. You could put an egg in it, and some of those rockets could go like 3,000 feet.
Yeah.
And in New Jersey, you had to have a license. You had to have a permit, and you had to, you had to agree to. I'm not going to fire these rockets near Newark Airport, which of course nobody. I don't know how they could enforce that. But my point is, if you're going to regulate the sale of rocket engines from hobby stores, you could do a much better job at a national level, managing the ammunition topic. Yeah. But let's go to another topic here. We'll go from one firepower topic to another, and that is we've got Apple WWDC22 next week. It's always a losing proposition, kind of betting on what the heck is going to be unveiled there. I mean, there are some sure things, of course, you can bet on. They'll be updating iOS. They'll be updating Mac OS. At a macro level, to me, it's always fascinating. Are those operating systems getting close together? Do we see one day when you'll have just one universal operating system across all your devices? Apple's positioning themselves very nicely with that because now they own the processor architecture across all their devices, which makes that task a lot easier. There's the ongoing debate versus touch and non-touch operating systems like a desktop operating system. There's rumors that that they'll be unveiling their new M2. And I actually saw a story this morning that said the M2 that Apple, since they're not getting to the right process technology, at least in 2022, the performance may not be as shattering as the M1 was when they announced that. We'll see if that happens. And of course, everybody is kind of, holding their breath on, do we get any more hints on Apple Car, John, which is probably going to be right up your alley. Right. Are they actually finally going to announce Apple glasses? Because, my big thing with Apple is that they really haven't been in a new product category, since the Apple Watch, which was a breakthrough platform for them. But, since then, it's really been rinse and repeat. Which is not bad. Their business is doing pretty okay. But John, let me start with you in terms of what will you be looking out for, if anything?
Gosh, I'm a terrible prognosticator for Apple, but I do think you will not see anything about an Apple Car. I don't think that's I think I'll go the negative route, and you won't see anything about an Apple Car. Could they do a deal with some automakers? I suppose, but they've been, inching toward, but they're nowhere near anything like that. And I don't think that they have any realistic plans for anything like that. I guess I'd be just going with the hints that one code, the idea of, being able to write it once and run on all the Apple products.
I have a feeling that tagline may have some hidden meaning into it. Yep.
I think so. That goes to your point about, we'd like to have one OS or one close to, something like that. So you can write a mobile app and then it runs on, not just iPhones, but also on the desktop. That would be a big deal. That would be a big deal.
It would be a big deal. Yes. And I suspect if I had to make a bet, and I am a bit of a betting man, I would bet that you're going to hear more about that, because think about the resources, the savings not only Apple would accrue, but developers. Now, because, hey, I come from a product company, given my marketing background.
Right.
When you have to have staff write applications for one operating system versus another operating system, there's always some leverage. But if it's common code across the device platform level, that's a big deal.
I think you'd see a lot more apps. You'd see a lot more people jumping on that right away for exactly that reason. Yeah.
Stuart, you're a betting man, right? That's how you.
Well, I think they've been working on that cross operating system stuff for years, and the rumor is that the new operating system will be called Mammoth. OS X 13, and with iOS 16. The other thing that I'm sort of looking forward to is possibly an always on screen like they have on the new series, the new Apple Watches, which is sort of like a half brightness, and they step down the screen resolution to the point so when you pick up your phone, at least you can see what the time is and what the weather is or whatever you put on your lock screen, that you'll be able to see it without turning on your phone. So I think that would be a really interesting upgrade on the technology. Obviously, this is always, as you mentioned, this is almost always a software show. It's not really a hardware show. But the big news that is being tossed around is the potential for an announcement of Apple TV and the NFL. That what they just did with baseball, that Apple may have grabbed a huge piece of the NFL TV market, which would be obviously a huge step up for them and allow them to advertise all their other programming. And it would be a game changer, I think, in the streaming industry if they grabbed some of the NFL piece. Again, it's a rumor. We don't know that they'll actually do it, but there have been rumors, and this would be the time to announce such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, the rumor, I've actually seen rumors that claim that the deal's already done and they're just waiting for the right moment to pull the cover.
Right
now,
moment to announce.
I also saw some data. Would be interested to get your opinion, Stuart, on. It was a real crazy, one of the reasons why I think people are not that crazy about the DirecTV package that you can now stream, the Sunday Ticket, which by the way, you don't have to have a satellite dish. You can stream that local to your device, but it's very expensive. I mean, it's like over the course of the year, during the football season, I want to say it's a couple $100, $250. It's not like baseball. Baseball is far less expensive if you want the streaming package. And the rumors I saw that they were going to have a very low price for it, which I don't know. Maybe I read the article the wrong way, but I would be shocked if Apple somehow create a new value proposition by hey, we can do this. We're going to give it to you for $50 or $60 versus the current
Apple. Apple can afford. They're one of the very few streaming companies that can actually afford it. Especially considering that they're not being as hard hit by what we're going to talk about next, or one of the next topics is all the factory shutdowns in China. So iPhone sales are unlikely to be as heavily effective, and iPhone obviously makes up 50% or so of Apple revenues. The other side is that I am sure that Apple is still willing to take a loss on the NFL if it boosts their streaming profile, which is Apple is one of the very few companies that really thinks out into the really long term and understands the value of a short-term investment for long-term gain. They've been shown over and over and over again that they're really good at that. At willing to take that kind of a move. So the fact that they may charge very little or include it in the Apple One bundle that they have now, with all the fitness stuff and Apple Music and as well as Apple TV, it makes perfect sense because they offer so many. Unlike Netflix, all Netflix does is content, whereas Apple has all these other, all they do is movies and TV. Apple has all these other services that you can bundle all together and make a very attractive package that, if it doesn't lose them money, make them money, certainly won't lose them money because they have so many other things to package it with.
Well, and the reason why you could see them do some type of announcement around this NFL thing at WWDC, because if they wait until September, when they generally announce new iPhones, the football season's already begun. So
already started. So this is the perfect time to announce it.
Yeah, I mean, they could do another event, I guess, in August, but WWDC gets tremendous attention
because they're probably going to want to do stuff that leads into training camps.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that'll be interesting.
Which is all
Last
this.
comment. Let me just get John's opinion, then I want to get Stuart your quick 30 seconds on it. Will we see Apple glasses? I mean, with the
not this year. They may announce an operating system for it. They may announce some technology partners, but I doubt very much that we will see again. This is not usually a hardware introduction show. So my guess is that we don't see Apple glasses or Apple AR until 2023. That's my guess.
John, you agree with that, John?
Yeah, I mean, the technology doesn't exist yet to enable that. The Google Glass, and remember what everybody called those people who wore those glasses. That's as good as it gets right now. It hasn't improved very much. It's the same thing with the metaverse problem, right? There's no metaverse. I mean, that's right now it's a pipe dream. You know, Second Life has been around forever and it's still around. So I don't think we'll see anything this year unless somebody in a lab somewhere has come up with some technology that I'm not aware of. But
I'm just very dubious. And, Apple, hey, they're successful in just about everything they do, but it would be an incredible embarrassment if they announced something that was kind of half-cocked, and was more kind of a gadget. And, right. I like to use the phrase with people, a problem that is, a solution, looking for a problem to solve. Right. Now, there's no question there are AR and VR and glasses that have very niche-y, very narrow usage model application that are highly productive. But in terms of a general piece of technology that I wear on my face in public around, I'm still struggling, there's privacy considerations, there's aesthetic considerations. I mean, I don't know if I want to walk around public with something that looks really weird, which is what obviously Google suffered with. So we're going to see what happens.
You mean what Stuart's wearing, a pair of glasses? No, I'm just kidding.
Those are called Walton glasses. You can get them.
I wear glasses. I'm laughing. But I wear glasses normally, yeah. Here we go.
Yeah, let's hit our next topic here. I know you guys are going to have a very strong opinion on this. We actually kind of chatted about this about a week ago. Yeah. That there has been a Supreme Court decision blocking the Texas and Florida social media laws that were designed to allow people to sue social media sites if they could prove that their children were harmed or there was harm involved. Stuart, your view on this?
Well, the argument that the anti-social media people are making, which tend to be on the right, which is that these companies, the platforms, are censoring conservative thought, of which there is no independent research that indicates this at all. It's all perceptual. But the problem is the legal argument that they're making is that these platforms are so prevalent and so powerful that they should be redefined as common carriers and fall under the same laws that rule telephone companies. In other words, what they're saying is if you call somebody, the telephone company can't censor your call. That's essentially the argument that is being made. From a pure legal point of view, what's happening is that there's a similar law in Florida, and you have two district courts who have ruled in two different ways. You have the Fifth Circuit in Texas, and that covers the Texas territory, which says, we agree that HB 20, which is the law in Texas, is perfectly fine, which is what the Supreme Court just blocked with three conservative judges, by the way, Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, in favor of. And then you had the Florida law, which was ruled against by the 11th Circuit. So what you have here is a split circuit decision on essentially the same types of laws. So this is what is going to lead it to get to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is the only one who could resolve the issues between the Fifth Circuit and the 11th Circuit. And again, the whole argument rests upon whether or not the government, the courts, should redefine these services as common carriers. Now, of course, we have the FCC, and who actually makes these determinations. And I don't think we've heard anything out of the FCC, whether or not they have filed an amicus brief along with the tech companies or not, whether or not they're remaining in. I honestly don't know where the FCC is. I can guess where the FCC would stand considering its political makeup, but I think this is not going to be resolved until it gets to the Supreme Court. And the fact that three conservative judges aren't looking at it the same way as the Fifth District is, if you are in favor of keeping these platforms and treating them as private entities that are not subject to First Amendment guarantees, then you have reason to be hopeful. But again, in this strange world we live in, anything can happen.
Well,
yes, there's a whole lot I could do with that comment, but yeah, I agree. So, John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the first point is obviously by no stretch of the imagination are any of these people common carriers. Just technically, they're just not. If they're common carriers, my dog is a common carrier. All right, they just don't have the technology. They don't, they're not a common carrier. They don't even own the servers. They don't own they're just so much of the stuff. They have nothing to do with being a common carrier. So that's out. So why has this come up? Well, because people want certain people back on some of these services. That's one reason. But the other reason is, sort of at root, if you go back a few years, 10 years or so, who's really to blame for this? Facebook is to blame for this. These companies that wanted, Yelp is to blame for this. They wanted basically to be regarded as common carriers initially because they didn't want to be responsible for the material that was on their websites, which is basically what they are. They're just websites. Really big, dispersed, distributed websites, but they're just websites. So they didn't want to be responsible for that. Oh, people say terrible things about your restaurant, or oh, people say terrible things on Twitter. I don't want to be responsible for that. How could I monitor all that? They wanted to be like common carriers. And now, so the conservatives come back a few years later and go, oh, you want to be a common carrier? All right, then. So you've got to have Nazi speech on there and everything that, it's really, if they got themselves into this mess, right? If they had stuck with what they are.
Well, John, I agree with that. And I know you guys will agree with this. In many states, a law will be proposed knowing full well that it's never going to pass or maybe challenged at the constitutional level in a federal district court or ultimately in the Supreme Court. But it's doing it to placate a political group. Okay, everybody, we all know that social media companies are bad companies. We're going to see if we can get away with passing this law, and that builds their credibility up with their base. And by the way, that happens on both sides. It's not purely a Republican or a Democratic thing, and because I know you guys are open-minded and know that. But I really think this falls into the same bailiwick, and I suspect the Supreme Court, with its, obviously it's skewed toward a conservative bent. I think you'll be surprised that they won't uphold those laws. It's hard for me to believe that. Maybe.
Well, they're also obviously being conservative, especially where Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett and John Roberts are concerned, is a very pro-business stance, and the Texas law is very anti-business. It does exactly what conservatives has always been against, in implying regulations to private companies, and that's something that mainstream conservatives are always in horror about, is over-regulation. And in essence, that's what the Texas law is doing, is trying to impose regulations on private companies.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll see.
Go ahead, John. John, give me 10 seconds. Let's wrap this one up.
Well, I was just thinking about all the weird Obama era rules and regulations that came into place too, that flipped this, that was subject of, lobbying groups on the technology side, of course, again, sort of protecting those companies from being sued for content that they might be on Twitter or might be on Yelp or Facebook. And so they very much wanted that, but that sort of treats them like a common carrier. That was kind of the idea there. Well, how could I police all that? But of course they could police all that. There's no reason why they shouldn't. Money is the reason they shouldn't. But money. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. What I thought was striking about the Supreme Court blocking that was that the Supreme Court, I can't remember who wrote the opinion, but basically they don't understand how, to Stuart's point, they don't understand what the internet is or how it works, because the idea that they would think it was an issue that, oh, maybe these are like common carriers, means you do not understand how the internet works. I mean, that's just plain flat out. And that was kind of frightening. It was like, oh, great. So as Stuart says, these are the people that are going to make those decisions. That's kind of scary.
No, you again, I like to remind you guys, you can extend that to Congress as well.
Absolutely.
We've talked many times when you get these senators and congressmen or congresswomen who've been when I hear Nancy Pelosi talk about technology, I get very frightened, because clearly they don't know what the hell they're talking about. It's one, you can take a position on an issue, and there's a lot of ways you can come into an issue, but in a fact-based type of way. You may not agree with it, but you can come to it in a very rational way. That doesn't happen in Washington a lot, unfortunately. People get to it, but hey, got to get to the next topic here, or I'll start to get really frustrated here. We don't want to do that on a Thursday here. So let's hit the last topic here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think this really surprised a lot of people, but because this is kind of the baby formula problem now extended to smartphones. But It looks like the China lockdowns are really impacting supply chain issues related to smartphone shipments. Singapore, has really been handcuffed, from a lockdown standpoint. But there's really large sections of Asia, of China, that have really been subject to more comprehensive lockdowns. I guess the question really is, do you see this having an impact, not just on smartphone shipments? It obviously will, but will it change the behavior? Could you see an Apple delay a iPhone announcement, or they're just going to announce in September as they normally do with much more limited availability? I mean, do you think it will change behavior from an announcement and go to market standpoint, Stuart?
There have been stories already that one iPhone 14 model, and it's got to be the top line, the Pro Max model, because that's obviously the most technology ridden, is delayed by 3 weeks, that they're already 3 weeks behind on the development and access to components that they would be starting the manufacturing process, which usually starts sometime in late June and early July. So unless somehow Apple makes that up. But a couple of other stories that have emerged yesterday or today, the stories are that Apple is moving a vast majority of its iPad manufacturing to Vietnam, which is an enormous move. And obviously, you just can't turn on a dime. That means that they've been working on this for a while. They have been shifting some production of both iPhones and especially iPads to Vietnam over the last couple of years. But the fact that now they're going to make the vast majority of them out of Vietnam is huge, because what it signals is perhaps the end of the reliance on the Chinese factories for production. Samsung, for instance, even though it's a Korean company, has announced that it will be shipping 30 million fewer phones in 2022 than originally planned. They had originally planned to manufacture or produce 310 million phones. They're now shooting at 280 million. So the three primary Chinese vendors, Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo, have all announced, or through their earnings, that their Q1 shipments just crashed. The local market in China is a disaster area, especially for the home brands other than Honor. Honor is the only one who seemed to be bucking the trends in China. And China, right now, is the world's largest smartphone market. I'm not counting India because I don't have 5G there yet. So there's all sorts of these rumblings going on, the factory lockdowns, the regional lockdowns, making it very difficult to make the phones. A lot of the factories there, by the way, or growing number of them, are moving their workers closer to the factories and quarantining them to make a closed system between living quarters and factory to avoid a lot of the regional lockdowns to try to overcome some of this. But this is going to be a disaster for Q2. And potentially leak into Q3, and whether or not it delays iPhone models in late Q3, early Q4, open question right now.
And John, I think I'd like you to opine on the economic. I know you're not an economist, but if something like this happens, where smartphone shipments really get cut back quite a bit, it has a ripple effect, and we're already in a recessionary environment. I mean, some people say we're in a recession already. Will this, contribute to that, from an impact standpoint?
Right. I think that some of this is not the announcements about reduced output from some of these manufacturers is not actually supply chain at all. It's demand.
No.
They can see that they're not going to have some of the demand for some of these the rest of the year. And they're already planning out. They're looking at the inflation rates. All our bills are going up. I mean, I've got to go and get groceries after this podcast. I'm afraid of getting groceries. And that means I'll have to cut back somewhere else, right? It means I'm not going to buy that webcam that I was going to upgrade, or maybe not upgrade my smartphone. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. And then there is this unpredictability of the supply chain, in that we all touted just-in-time manufacturing delivery for so many years. So we got there and it made it very unpredictable. There's some little hiccup, as we've discovered, with my grape nuts or baby formula, and it just throws everything out. So I think that it's part of the demand and part of that, you know what, we're going to have some supply chain hiccups going out there. So we'll just not plan on making as many as we were going to this year. The Shanghai experience, I think I mentioned this to you guys last week, but a couple of the factories, the people were locked down in the factory. Mm-hmm. So I visited a bicycle retailer, and she told me, oh, I can't get bikes from so-and-so, and I can't get bikes from so-and-so. I won't say who the manufacturers are or the brands are, but this one manufacturer is sending me dozens of bikes. And sure enough, her e-bikes were just filling up this retail outlet because they were locked into the factory. They were literally quarantined in the factory. So that manufacturer continued to churn out e-bikes. So, that seems like a crazy idea. So you're right, though, Mark. It could be that as they build these like corporate bubbles, like we've seen in many countries where they have the Samsung City, Samsung apartments next to the Samsung factory, and a lot of these.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe we'll see that because of this.
Yeah, the way I think I'll wrap this up is I think that if all of this is accurate, and there's every reason to believe that it is, this is going to test the brand loyalty of Apple in ways that I never thought they'd be. I think they'd never be thought they'd be tested. I mean, when you start talking about, especially at the high end, when you start talking about $1,400, $1,500 phones, which is where Apple plays, with their higher end models, and then you look at gasoline that out here in California now is $6, $7, $8 a gallon. I got to drive.
Right.
I can still use my iPhone 13 or my iPhone 12.
Exactly.
Make the trade-off. And to your point, John, this is really exposing the challenges. Just-in-time manufacturing is great when you don't have these problems. You have the supply chain is running like a finely tuned machine. But when some of the cylinders are not firing, these kind of things happen. So it's going to be an interesting.
Only as strong as your weakest link.
Right. Yes. You are the weakest link. Sorry.
Yes. Great way to conclude the podcast, Stuart. So, guys, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. If you haven't already, please make a donation to the Red Cross or your preferred charitable organization to help the brave people of Ukraine in their time of need. And until next time, guys, have a great week. Talk to you soon.